History has always feared powerful women. It called them monsters. It called them murderers. It called them witches and tyrants and madwomen. But when you actually look at the evidence, when you strip away 3 centuries of propaganda, what you find is far more disturbing than the legends. Because some of these women were exactly as terrible as history says, and some of them were something else entirely. Tonight we meet all of them. There's a particular kind of hatred that history reserved for women, not the straightforward hatred of enemies, not the grudging respect given to defeated opponents, but something more personal, more visceral, more enduring. The hatred that history gives to women who disturbed the order of things, who held power they were not supposed to hold, who committed violence in a world that considered violence a male province, who refused to be what their era demanded, or who were simply convenient. Tonight we examine 5 women who became history's most hated. Marie Antoinette, who was called Madame Deficit while her people starved. Elizabeth Bathory, who allegedly bathed in the blood of 650 virgins. Mary Tudor, who burned nearly 300 Protestants and earned the name Bloody Mary forever. Irma Grese, the beautiful beast of Belsen, concentration camp guard, sadist, who walked the perimeter of Bergen-Belsen with a whip, and Ilse Koch, the witch of Buchenwald, whose crimes were so extreme that American soldiers wept when they described what they found. 5 women, 5 stories, each one chosen by history for a particular kind of immortal infamy. But here is what makes this story worth telling. Not all of these women were equally guilty. Not all of them were guilty in the ways history claims. And not all of them were hated only for what they did. Some were hated for what they were. And understanding the difference is the darkest lesson history has to teach us. We begin in Versailles, in the most gilded prison in the world, with a teenage girl from Austria who never quite understood what she had walked into until it was far too late. Because the story of Marie Antoinette is not simply a story about a queen who spent too much money. It is a story about what happens when an entire nation decides that one woman is responsible for everything that has gone wrong, and what that decision reveals about the people who made it. She arrived in France in 1770. She was 14 years old, an Austrian archduchess, the youngest daughter of the most powerful woman in Europe, Maria Theresa, Empress of Austria. She had been trained from birth for exactly this moment. Marriage to the French Dauphin, the future King Louis XVI, a diplomatic alliance between 2 great powers, sealed with a teenage girl. The ceremony at the border was extraordinary in its cruelty. Before crossing from Austrian territory into France, Marie Antoinette was required to remove every item of Austrian clothing she was wearing, every piece of jewelry, every hairpin, everything Austrian. She was dressed entirely in French clothing, in the presence of French court officials. She was, in the most literal sense, stripped of her identity and rebuilt as a French possession. She was 14 years old. She had left behind her family, her country, her language, her pet dogs, and she crossed into France, alone, among strangers, to marry a boy she had never met. Louis was 16, awkward, shy, intensely interested in clockmaking and hunting, not particularly interested in his new wife. The marriage was not consummated for 7 years. 7 years, during which the French court watched and whispered, during which Marie Antoinette, young, bored, isolated, far from home, did what bored young women at the most extravagant court in the world tend to do. She spent money, enormous amounts of it, on clothes, on jewelry, on gambling, on elaborate hairstyles that became her trademark, towers of powder hair sometimes 3 feet high, decorated with ships, birds, entire gardens. She redecorated Versailles. She built herself a miniature village, the Hameau de Lorraine, a fake rustic retreat where she could play at being a shepherdess. And France watched and seethed, because France in the 1770s and 1780s was not Versailles. France was a country of crushing poverty, of failed harvests, of a tax system so unjust that the poorest paid the most and the richest, including the nobility living at Versailles, paid almost nothing, of a government so indebted from wars, including the American Revolution, which France had funded, that it was approaching collapse, and the pamphlets began. Vicious, sexual, specific in their accusations. Marie Antoinette was called Madame Deficit. She was accused of having affairs with everyone from her ladies-in-waiting to her brother-in-law to a Swedish nobleman named Axel von Fersen. The pamphlets describe her in terms so obscene that historians still struggle to quote them directly. Was any of it true? The affairs are unproven. The spending was real but wildly exaggerated in the public imagination. The famous line, "Let them eat cake," was almost certainly never said by her. It was attributed to her in revolutionary pamphlets. But the phrase itself appeared in print years before she arrived in France. The reality was more complicated and more sad. Marie Antoinette did spend extravagantly, but so did every queen before her. Her spending was a fraction of the actual French deficit. She was a convenient symbol, a foreign woman, an Austrian, expensive, visible, in a country looking for someone to blame for problems that had been building for generations. When the revolution came, Louis and Marie Antoinette attempted to flee France. In 1791, the flight to Varennes, they were caught, recognized, brought back to Paris. Louis was executed in January 1793. Marie Antoinette was imprisoned in the Conciergerie, where she was denied almost everything. Her children were taken from her. Her son, 8 years old, was taken and pressured by his keepers to accuse his mother of sexual abuse. He signed the accusation, whether under genuine belief or under coercion, that a child could not resist. We do not know. At her trial in October 1793, the charge was read. Marie Antoinette's response has become one of the most famous moments of the revolution. She looked at the audience. She said, "Nature itself recoils at such a charge laid against a mother." She appealed to every mother in the room. The hall fell silent. She was convicted anyway. And on the 16th of October 1793, she was taken to the guillotine. She was 37 years old. She had arrived in France at 14. She had spent 23 years as a symbol, first of France's alliance with Austria, then of its success, then of its enemies. She had never been allowed to simply be a person. On the way to the scaffold, she accidentally stepped on her executioner's foot. She apologized. "Pardon me," she said. "I did not do it on purpose." Her last words were an apology for stepping on someone's foot on the way to her own execution. That detail tells you more about Marie Antoinette than any pamphlet, any accusation, any legend. A woman trained from childhood to be perfect, who apologized for existing until they cut off her head. Marie Antoinette was hated for what she represented: wealth, foreignness, excess. But the next woman on our list was hated for something far more visceral, something that has made her name synonymous with horror for 400 years. The question is, how much of it actually happened, and who decided it was time to stop her? Because the trial of Elizabeth Bathory was not simply a criminal proceeding. It was a political operation, and the man who orchestrated it had very specific reasons for wanting her gone, reasons that had nothing to do with the girls she allegedly killed. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful noble families in Hungary. The Bathorys were not a gentle family. Her uncle Stephen became king of Poland. Her cousin Sigismund became Prince of Transylvania. And various other relatives were known for cruelty, violence, and what contemporaries described as madness. Elizabeth herself suffered from seizures throughout her life, possibly epilepsy, a condition that in the 16th century was associated, in the popular imagination, with demonic possession. She was married at 15 to Ferenc Nadasdy, a Hungarian military commander known as the Black Knight of Hungary, a man celebrated for his battlefield brutality, who reportedly taught his young wife methods of punishing servants, who beat female servants himself, who is almost never mentioned in accounts of Elizabeth Bathory, because the story requires a female monster, and a husband who taught his wife to be cruel is a complicating detail. When Ferenc died in 1604, Elizabeth was left alone, a wealthy widow, controlling vast estates. In a world where widows with assets were vulnerable, the accusations began almost immediately. rumors that she was torturing and killing servant girls. Young women brought to her castle at Cactus, ostensibly to be trained as ladies-in-waiting. The numbers and the accusations grew with each retelling. 50 girls, 100, 200. Eventually, in the testimony gathered after her arrest, the figure of 650 was mentioned by a single witness, who was not present for most of what she described. In 1610, King Matthias of Hungary ordered an investigation, led by Elizabeth's own cousin, Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, the most powerful noble in the kingdom after the king himself. Thurzo arrived at Cactus Castle on the night of December the 29th, 1610, and found, depending on which account you read, a dead girl in the main hall, several dying girls, and evidence of ongoing torture, or, depending on other accounts, arrived during a routine visit and found nothing particularly unusual. The testimony gathered by Thurzo's investigation was taken from over 300 witnesses, under conditions that historians describe as deeply problematic. Servants were questioned, some under torture. The specific detail that has haunted Elizabeth Bathory's reputation for 4 centuries, that she bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth, appears nowhere in the original trial records. It was added to the story by a Jesuit priest named Laszlo Tarazzi, 100 years after her death. In a book, what the trial records actually describe is real enough. Girls beaten, girls burned with hot irons, girls left outside in winter, girls who died. The exact number is impossible to establish. The register of a local church records burial entries that may correspond to victims. Historians who have studied the records most carefully suggest the real number may be in the dozens, not 650. But here is the detail that makes the Bathory case historically significant beyond the horror. King Matthias owed Elizabeth Bathory an enormous sum of money. Her late husband had loaned the crown vast amounts. If Elizabeth was convicted of crimes serious enough to result in the forfeiture of her estate, the debt would disappear. Georgi Thurzo, who led the investigation, would inherit significant portions of her land. Elizabeth Bathory was never tried. She was never permitted to speak in her own defense. She was sentenced without trial, walled into a room in her own castle, with openings only for food and air. She died there in 1614, 4 years later. Was she guilty? Almost certainly of something. The beating and mistreatment of servants was common among Hungarian nobility and not in itself remarkable. The deaths of girls in her care, however many there were, appear to be real, but the blood bathing, the 650, the female Dracula of legend, that was constructed after her death by a Jesuit writer in a country that had decided a female monster was more interesting than the financial and political motivations of the men who destroyed her. History agreed. And Elizabeth Bathory became the most prolific female serial killer in recorded history, based on testimony gathered under torture. In a trial she was never allowed to attend, about crimes documented by a man who stood to gain enormously from her destruction. The truth, as always, is darker and far less simple than the legend. Elizabeth Bathory's guilt was constructed by men who needed her guilty, but the next woman on our list left no room for ambiguity. Mary Tudor burned 280 people in less than 4 years. The records are meticulous. The fires were public. And the name they gave her, Bloody Mary, has outlasted everything else she ever did. But the story of why she burned them is darker and more human than the name suggests. Because Mary Tudor did not begin her life as Bloody Mary. She began it as the most educated princess in Europe, the daughter of a king who loved her, until the day he decided she was inconvenient. And everything that came after, every fire, every execution, can be traced back to that decision and what it did to her. Mary Tudor was born in 1516, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. For the first 9 years of her life, she was the most important girl in England, beloved by her father, educated to an extraordinary standard. Latin, French, music, philosophy, prepared to rule. And then her father decided he wanted a son and a different wife. And Bullen, What happened to Mary in the years that followed was a systematic destruction. Her parents' marriage was declared invalid. She was declared illegitimate. Her title of princess was stripped. She was referred to only as Lady Mary. She was removed from the succession, separated from her mother, whom she never saw again. Catherine of Aragon died in 1536, alone, having been refused access to her daughter for years. Mary was made to serve as a lady in waiting to her infant half-sister, Elizabeth, and Bullen's child, the child whose existence had made Mary illegitimate. She was required to sign a document acknowledging that her parents' marriage had been invalid, that she was illegitimate, that her father was the supreme head of the Church of England, rejecting the Pope, rejecting everything her Catholic faith held sacred. She signed, under what her supporters called extreme duress, under what historians describe as a young woman facing death if she refused. She was 20 years old. The trauma of these years never left Mary. It shaped everything she did with power when she finally held it. When Henry died in 1547, Edward VI, his son by Jane Seymour, became king. A boy, a Protestant, who died at 15. In 1553, Mary Tudor took the throne, England's first queen regnant, the first woman to rule England in her own right, a remarkable achievement by any measure. She was 37 years old. She had survived everything Henry had done to her. She had survived Edward's Protestant reign. She had survived an attempt to put Lady Jane Grey on the throne ahead of her. She had ridden into London with popular support, with cheering crowds, with genuine goodwill, and then she began to burn people. The first burning was in February 1555. The last was in November 1558. 3 years and 9 months. 284 people burned at the stake for refusing to renounce Protestant beliefs. The numbers are real. The fires were public. They were attended by crowds, some of whom cheered, some of whom wept, some of whom gathered the ashes of the dead as relics. The most famous of the burnings were those of the Oxford martyrs. The Protestant bishops Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer burned in Oxford in 1555 and 1556. Hugh Latimer's words as the fire was lit have been remembered for 5 centuries. "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." He was right. The burnings defined Mary's reign. They defined her legacy. They gave her her name. But here is what the name erases. Henry VIII burned people. He burned Catholics. He burned Protestants. He burned anyone who disagreed with whatever he currently believed. Edward VI's government burned people. Elizabeth I, who came after Mary, executed more people for religion than Mary did. But they do not have names like Bloody Mary, because they were men, and because the Protestant propagandist John Fox published his Book of Martyrs in 1563, a meticulous, illustrated, enormously influential account of Protestant suffering under Mary, which shaped how England, and subsequently how history, remembered her. Mary also made other catastrophic decisions. She married Philip II of Spain, deeply unpopular with English subjects who feared foreign domination. She lost Calais, England's last territory in France, in 1558, a loss that humiliated England. She died in November 1558, possibly of uterine or ovarian cancer, after 2 phantom pregnancies that devastated her psychologically. She had desperately wanted a child, an heir, something to secure the Catholic succession she had sacrificed everything to restore. She died without one, reportedly saying that when they opened her body after death, they would find Calais written on her heart. She was 42 years old. Was she a monster? She burned 284 people. By any modern standard, that is monstrous. But she burned fewer people than her father. She burned fewer people than the Protestant regime that followed her. She governed in a century when burning was the accepted punishment for heresy. In every country in Europe, Catholic and Protestant alike, she became Bloody Mary because she lost, because the religion she was burning people for was replaced, because the man who wrote the most influential account of her reign was on the other side, and because history, as always, is written by the survivors. Mary Tudor burned people in the name of God and lost everything anyway. The next two women on our list committed their crimes in the name of something far more modern, far more systematic, and far more difficult to explain away, because Irma Grese and Ilse Koch did not live in a world that thought burning people was acceptable. They lived in ours, and what they did requires no historical context to understand, only the courage to look directly at it. Because Irma Grese was 22 years old when she was executed. 22. She had been a concentration camp guard since she was 19. And the question of how a 19-year-old girl becomes one of the most feared human beings in the Nazi concentration camp system is a question that psychology and history have been attempting to answer for 80 years and have not entirely succeeded. Irma Grese was born in 1923 in a small village in northeastern Germany. Her childhood was not straightforward. Her mother committed suicide when Irma was 12. Her father, a dairy farmer, was strict, authoritarian, distant. She left school at 15. She wanted to be a nurse. She applied to work in an SS hospital. Her father forbade it. She applied anyway, and instead of nursing, she found herself working in the service of the Nazi state. At 18, she volunteered for the SS-Volk, the female auxiliary of the SS. Women could not be full SS members, but they could serve in the concentration camp system, as guards, as supervisors. In December 1942, Irma Grese was assigned to Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp north of Berlin. In 1943, she was transferred to Auschwitz, where she was eventually promoted to Lagerführerin, senior supervisor, one of the most powerful female positions in the camp. What happened at Auschwitz under Irma Grese's supervision has been documented in extraordinary detail by survivors, by colleagues, by her own testimony at trial. She was known for her physical beauty, blue eyes, blonde hair, perfect physical embodiment of the Nazi ideal. She was known for her boots, her whip, her pistol, her dog. She beat prisoners. Arbitrarily, severely, she shot prisoners. For sport, for reasons so minor they defy rational explanation, for no reason at all. She selected prisoners for the gas chambers, pointing, this one, that one, with the casual authority of someone deciding what to have for dinner. She was implicated in the arbitrary killing of individual prisoners, in the running of what survivors described as a personal reign of terror over the women's section of Auschwitz. In 1944, she was transferred to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued in the same manner, and where she acquired her nickname, the Beautiful Beast. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen in April 1945, what they found was beyond anything they had been prepared for. Tens of thousands of dead, corpses stacked in piles, the living barely distinguishable from the dead. British soldiers who had fought through North Africa and Italy, who had landed on D-Day, wept. BBC correspondent Richard Dimbleby's broadcast from Bergen-Belsen is still considered one of the most disturbing pieces of radio ever transmitted. He had to stop recording multiple times, unable to continue. Irma Grese was arrested at Bergen-Belsen at 21 years old. She was tried at the Belsen trial in September and October 1945, one of the first major war crimes trials. She was charged with crimes against humanity. Survivors testified in detail about what she had done, about who she had killed, about how she had treated the women under her authority. She denied almost everything. She was convicted. She was sentenced to death. On the 13th of December 1945, Irma Grese was hanged at Hameln prison. She was 22 years old. She reportedly walked to the gallows without hesitation. She shouted the single word Schnell, quickly, to the hangman, as her final act. How does a 19-year-old become Irma Grese? This is a question that has occupied historians and psychologists for 80 years. The answers are uncomfortable because they do not involve a monster. They involve a system that selected for certain personality types, that provided unlimited power over other human beings, that normalized cruelty through constant exposure, that rewarded brutality with promotion, that surrounded its participants with others doing the same things, until those things no longer required any particular motivation. They simply required showing up, Irma Grese was not uniquely evil. She was what the Nazi system selected for, what it trained, what it created, and what it required to function. This does not excuse her. Nothing excuses what she did, but understanding how she became what she became is the most important lesson of her story, because the system that made Irma Grese did not require monsters. It required ordinary people who were given power over other people and told that those other people were not people. That is the darkest thing about Irma Grese. Not her whip, not her pistol, not her boots, but how straightforward, how completely ordinary her transformation was. Irma Grese killed because the system rewarded killing. Ilse Koch did something different, something that went so far beyond the logic of the concentration camp system that even her SS colleagues found it disturbing. And what she did with the bodies of the people who died at Buchenwald has become one of the most iconic and most contested images of Nazi atrocity. Ilse Koch was born in 1906. In Dresden, she worked as a secretary. She joined the Nazi Party in 1932. In 1936, she married Karl Otto Koch, the commandant of Buchenwald concentration camp, and moved with him into the villa that sat just outside the camp perimeter, from which the chimneys of the crematoria were visible, from which the sounds of the camp were audible every day for years. Ilse Koch's specific crimes were documented at the Buchenwald trials. She was known at the camp as the Kommanduse, the commandant's wife, who walked the camp perimeter, who had prisoners beaten, who selected prisoners for punishment on personal whim. But the accusation that defined her legacy, that gave her the name the Witch of Buchenwald, was the lampshade. The accusation that she had selected prisoners with distinctive tattoos, had them killed, and had their skin removed and tanned, used to make lampshades, book covers, gloves, decorative items for her personal use. In her home, just outside the camp, this accusation was presented at the Nuremberg trials. It was repeated by American prosecutors. It was accepted by much of the public as established fact, and it has been contested ever since. Forensic analysis of items presented as evidence at various trials, including a lampshade at Buchenwald itself, has produced contradictory results. Some tests indicated human skin, others indicated animal skin. A 2012 DNA analysis of the Buchenwald lampshade concluded it was made of cowhide, not human skin. Does this mean Ilse Koch was innocent? No. The documented beatings were real. The abuse of prisoners was real. The culture of sadism that surrounded her and her husband at Buchenwald was real. But the specific details that made her the most iconic female Nazi villain, the human skin lampshades, the book covers, the gloves, these exist in a historical gray zone where documented atrocity and wartime prosecution eager for convictions overlap in ways that are impossible to fully separate. What is not in any gray zone, what is established beyond question, is what happened at Buchenwald, where over 56,000 people died, where medical experiments were conducted on living prisoners, where the camp orchestra was required to play cheerful music as prisoners were marched to forced labor, where the commandant's wife walked the perimeter, selecting people for punishment, in the villa where the chimneys were always visible. Ilse Koch was tried multiple times, by American military tribunals, by West German courts. She was convicted, sentenced to life imprisonment. She spent most of her remaining life in Bavarian prison. In 1967, she was told that her sentence would not be reduced, that she would die in prison. She hanged herself in her cell. She was 60 years old. Her son, born in Buchenwald in 1943, fathered by one of the guards, while she was married to the commandant, discovered who his mother was as an adult, and has spent his life trying to understand it. Unable to, the children of the perpetrators, carrying a weight that is not theirs, that was never theirs, that was placed on them by people who made choices, in a place where the chimneys were always visible, and chose to stay. 5 women, 5 stories, 5 different kinds of hatred. Marie Antoinette, hated for what she represented, a symbol of excess in a country that could no longer afford excess, who apologized for stepping on her executioner's foot on her way to her own death. Elizabeth Bathory, hated for what men needed her to be, a monster convenient enough to destroy, by people who stood to inherit everything she owned. Mary Tudor, hated for what she did, in a century when everyone was doing it, and hated more than the others because she lost, and because the people who came after her wrote the history books. Irma Grese, hated for what a system made her, a system that did not require monsters, only ordinary people with power and permission. And Ilse Koch, hated for crimes both real and constructed, in a place where 56,000 people died, within sight of a villa where someone chose to stay. History's hatred of women is not always wrong. Sometimes a hatred is entirely justified. Grese and Koch deserve every word of it. But sometimes the hatred is a tool used to erase financial debt, or silence political enemies, or make one convenient female symbol carry the weight of generations of systemic failure. The difference matters. Understanding the difference is the darkest and most important lesson these 5 women have to teach. Subscribe to Veil of Europa. Every week, we go deeper into the history that disturbs, the history that challenges, the history that refuses to be simple. We'll see you in the shadows.